Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll just give people a few seconds to get in through the lobby and we'll get started. All right, so thank you for joining us today. My name's Michelle. I am joined by my colleague Jo Croak today and some fantastic speakers, which I'll introduce to you shortly. Before we get started, I guess just like to note that this webinar is being recorded and that your cameras and microphones have been turned off. If you have bypassed that setting, please just be aware that your image may be shared as part of sharing the recording of this session today. And if you have any questions, please reach out to Jo in the chat. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all joining from today. I'm fortunate to be joining from Wadawurrung country today and would like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people joining us today. We acknowledge the importance of connection to culture and community for First Nations children, and that sovereignty has never been ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today, we're exploring inclusive practice in supporting children to engage in early learning opportunities. And we've got a number of guest speakers today making up our panel who'll be talking about their roles, but also some practical examples of where care teams have come together to overcome a variety of barriers for children to engage and participate in education who may have otherwise been at risk of being excluded. It's important to note that exclusion can take many forms, including children who face barriers due to geographic location, service availability, children from culturally diverse backgrounds who may not have a full awareness of the amount of early childhood learning opportunities there are here in Victoria, but also children with disabilities, children who have experienced trauma, and also children in out-of-home care. They all face, additional barriers to inclusion and at times have been subject to exclusive type practices in terms of being able to access the full education availability that's available for them, such as things like reduced timetables. Many of these barriers are out of our control, but you would be surprised at what barriers can be overcome when care teams work together to support children and their families. We're fortunate here in Victoria to have a strong early childhood education system, one that's underpinned by the principles of equity, diversity and respect. Yet we know inclusion is not guaranteed for every child. Children from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and children with disabilities and those known to child protection can face significant barriers to access and fully participating in early learning. These barriers take many forms, from structural and systematic challenges to everyday practice that unintentionally can exclude or overlook the needs of these children and their families. So today, with the help of our panel, we'll reflect on some of these realities and, more importantly, explore the actions that we can take individually and collectively to break down those barriers and to explore how inclusive practices can be embedded at all levels of practice and across a variety of professions. We have in the virtual room today, so that every child is not only welcomed, but is genuinely supported to learn, grow and belong in education. And if we can achieve this in the early years, when the brain's architecture is being built, we can step children up on a positive learning trajectory that will have a long-lasting impact on their lives. Where we see success, it's often due to the tireless efforts of individual educators, case managers, early intervention workers, maternal child health nurses, and many other professionals who support children and families. But what if the ecosystem surrounding a child all work together to promote and to demand access to meaningful engagement for all children? By building a strong care team, being focused on the goals and rights of children, that can make all the difference. There's a lot of research available. There's not a lot of research available in this area, both across Australia, but also in the rest of the world. Well, in Australia, children are overwhelmingly well included in early education. Research indicates, again, particularly those children from First Nations backgrounds, children with disability and developmental vulnerabilities, and children in out-of-home care face the greatest barriers. And the most commonly cited reasons for exclusion in the education space looks at the safety of the child that's being excluded, concerns for the safety of the child's peers, and also concerns for the safety of program staff. Some of the additional reasons might be about, in terms of some of those reduced timetables and things like that, is about providing teachers with respite from those, really challenging students, and also looking at the resourcing of the inclusion program. There is international research on the issue, and again, largely this comes from the United States, which shows that exclusion disproportionately affects children and families in marginalised groups, particularly children exposed to the ACEs, or the adverse childhood experiences, which includes abuse, exposure to family violence, caregiver mental health concerns and neglect, as well as a number of other things. And of these adverse experiences, there were higher exclusion rates for children experiencing domestic or family violence and parental mental illness. Children with disabilities also faced higher exclusion rates in the US, and African American and Hispanic children were more likely to be excluded than Caucasian children. And in terms of gender, boys are significantly more likely to be excluded than girls. Some of the teacher characteristics relating to exclusion included higher expulsion rates linked to the teacher's level of stress, depression, or lack of support. Safety concerns, implicit bias, and cultural difference also affect exclusionary practices. And what the research in the United States shows in terms of what works is that teachers who have a higher capacity to manage stress and reframe relationships were less likely to use exclusion type practices, and the more experienced teachers were using exclusionary practice less frequently. And some states in the US have implemented reforms banning suspensions, which have led to significant reductions in lost instructional days, and also racial disparities, and improve school and climate academic outcomes. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panel for today, and I'm going to give them some time to introduce themselves and their roles in more detail in just a moment. But joining us today, we have Sally Moore, who's the CEO of Early Childhood Intervention Australia, VIC-TAS. Sally is an experienced teacher and early childhood intervention professional, and she has worked in the early childhood education and care setting and schools before moving into the early childhood intervention sector with children with developmental delay and disabilities. We also have joining us, who's not online currently, but she will hopefully be able to join us soon, Christie Silk, who's the Manager of Inclusion Programs in the Early Learning and Practice and Participation Division within the Department of Education. We have Lee Cameron, who is the Director of Trauma-Informed Programs at the Alannah and Madeline Foundation. Lee is a social worker with more than 30 years experience working with children and young people and their families, and is deeply committed to cutting-edge service provision and reshaping how we respond to complex social challenges. Lee has held senior leadership and clinical roles across the child, youth and family sector, including within DFFH, Anglicare and the Salvation Army, and she has a strong track record of designing and implementing programs that improve outcomes for children facing significant vulnerability, and has been instrumental in the initiatives to protect children from the impacts of violence at the Alannah and Madeline Foundation. So Lee's current portfolio includes the TRACS program, which is coaching and training and support for educators in their work with children and families, and the Cubby House program, and also the Children Ahead therapeutic case management service, and Buddy Bags, which is our material aid program for children, and we'll pop a link in the chat to the Alannah and Madeline Foundation website where you can check out some of those programs. And then we also have Jacqueline, Timberlake and Nicole Smith joining us today, who are from the Department of Education's Barwon office, who are going to talk us through some of the ways that they have been implementing things like flexible support packages in the Barwon region. So I am going to take down the slides now so you can see our speakers more clearly. And we will get started. So Sally, I might start with you. Do you want to introduce us and tell us a little bit about the role that Early Childhood Intervention Australia plays? Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. It's really wonderful to be here this afternoon with you all. My name is Sally Moore. I'm the CEO of Early Childhood Intervention Australia, Victoria, Tasmania. Such a long name, you can just go with ECIA for short. We are a membership organisation that represent providers working in the early childhood intervention space, but we also have members who are from the early childhood education and care space, parents and students as well. So really focused on holistically looking at how we support children within the early learning space. We've been around for 40 years. We are actually celebrating 40 years this year, which is super exciting. We are really strong advocates for all children, and particularly those with developmental delay and disability. A lot of my work is having conversations with organisations such as the NDIA, Department of Education, Department of Health, and currently working busily on foundational supports. You may have heard that term. Hopefully more information will come out soon. We also develop resources, provide training. I would encourage you to jump on our website and see what is there as well. We have a couple of suites of resources for families that are free that you can just download and share. And then we also have a phone line where families or professionals call in and ask all sorts of questions, often about navigating our service systems. So that's ECIA within a nutshell. And yeah, we're celebrating 40 years. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Sally. Lee, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Michelle, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've already been given a very long intro, so I won't say anything more about me, but the Alannah and Madeline Foundation runs a series of programs that have a focus specifically on the support and recovery of children who've experienced trauma or violence. That stems from our origin story at Port Arthur 25 years ago and remains very central to our mission. So the program that I'm here programs that I'm here largely to represent today are our Trauma Consultancy Service, or TRACS, and our Children Ahead program, where we interface very, very closely with early childhood education care services. Rather than speak about that in any great detail, I've provided some information to Michelle and Joe, and they'll be sharing that with you after the session today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lee. Christie, do you want to just give a brief introduction of yourself and your role within the department? We can't hear you, Christie.
Hi, sorry, I didn't listen to the rules about the presenter screen, so apologies. Thank you so much for having us. So my name's Christie Silk. I'm from the Department of Education, and I'm here with my colleague Dan Barber, and we're in the inclusive programs teams, and we work with our colleagues across the early childhood division to support children from a range of backgrounds to engage and participate fully in early childhood education and care. And partnership working is obviously absolutely central to that, and so it's such a pleasure to be here, and really looking forward to listening to everybody's perspectives, and to be talking alongside both ECIA and the Alannah and Madeline Foundation, which do extraordinary work. So yeah, really real privilege. Thank you so much. And our ESID colleagues as well, who are doing amazing things as well.
Absolutely. And I might hand over to you, Nicole and Jackie, to introduce yourselves and the work you're doing down in Barwon.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm Nicole Smith. I'm a Senior Kindergarten Improvement Advisor in the Early Childhood Improvement Branch for the Department of Education, Victorian Partner Department of Education. And we're down in Barwon, which is sort of like the Colac, Surf Coast, Geelong, Queenscliff area. The Early Childhood Branch is a fairly new in the scheme of 40 years or more, as in we've only been around for a few years, maybe 4 years. So while there's always been kindergarten funding, support, luckily our early childhood space in the Department of Education has grown to actually support lots of different programs, and so we've got specialist kindergarten teachers and funding advisors and others who work in the early childhood branch to support the sector, the early years sector, to deliver funded kindergarten programs. And I'll hand over to my colleague Jackie.
Hi everyone, my name's Jackie. I am also a Kindergarten Improvement Advisor from the Early Childhood Branch in Barwon, but prior to that I was actually an Early Childhood Learning Advisor from the Lookout Centre, and I can actually see there's some of my previous Lookout colleagues in the audience today, so shout out to those guys, they do an amazing job. So part of that work was to support participation and engagement in funded kinder for children in out-of-home care. So I just bring that knowledge into the role of Kia and everything that Nicole said, essentially.
And also just a reminder, Kelly Stacey is our branch manager here, and she unfortunately had something else on and couldn't make it today, so her apologies.
Excellent. Thanks, Nicole and Jackie. So we're going to kick off, and I'm going to go back to you, Sally, because I know you've got a few slides to share with us, including a bit of a case example for us to explore some of the work that your team, I guess, has been doing in terms of supporting inclusion. So I'm going to hand back over to you, Sally.
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, I do have slides. I am a teacher, and they really help me remember everything that I wanted to share with you today. So I'll just share my screen. And I wanted to share with you a case study about a little person who I'm calling Omar today, de-identified of course. Omar is 4 years old. He loves playing outside. He loves water play. He loves cars. He loves trucks. He loves music and dancing. He's an active little soul, and his body loves to move. His mum is his primary carer, and prior to kinder has taken him to supported playgroup until he was old enough for kinder. And his mum was the one who went through the process of enrolling him in kinder, which thankfully is not too far away from home. It's about a 5-minute drive. He uses lots of verbal language, but he's really also good at combining that with lots of gestures. He does have an autism diagnosis, and he does have an NDIS package. He has a key worker who provides fortnightly supports in the home and has been coming and working with the family, and the key worker was particularly supportive in promoting going to kinder and helping mum get enrolled and do all the paperwork and that side of things. But we should also note that he can become dysregulated, and he will use behaviour as a communication tool. And I really want to stress that today around the importance of behaviour as a tool for communication. It is up to us, who are the adults who are working with children, to become the detectives and work out what that really means. For Omar, this is often when he is overwhelmed with lots of sensory stimuli, or a common one, he can't get what he wants. And so he will at times use behaviour for that. So in trying to set Omar up and his family in the best possible way leading into the start for kinder, it was agreed that he might need some additional orientation sessions, and the kinder were fantastic in terms of working out times where he could pop in for a short visit so he could see where things were and start to become comfortable in the space. Mum had enrolled him in a 3-day-a-week program for 5 hours per day. In that very first week, and Michelle talked extensively at the beginning about the importance of care team meetings and everybody who is working with a child coming together, and that's exactly what happened. So fortunately, his NDIS funded key worker was able to be there, the family were there, and kinder teacher was there as well. And this was really beneficial in terms of having that conversation around goals and identifying what are the crossovers between things that need to be supported at home and things that could also be supported at kinder as well. That was a really good conversation and sharing from the key worker about strategies and tools and techniques. And you'll see I put a visual schedule there. I'm sure you're all very familiar with those kind of techniques. And Omar started, and the initial couple of weeks went okay, which was really great. The team had done some fantastic planning and it started and it was okay. There were some moments of dysregulation and his use of behaviour as a communication tool, but the team were great at actually jumping in and co-regulating with him. And then after a few weeks, it started to fall apart. It was almost like Omar realised, oh gosh, this keeps going. I need to come here every single week. And his behaviours changed. So they were seeing more episodes within the kinder time. He was not wanting to get into the car with mum, and he was a really unhappy little camper. And as part of this conversation with that, then the Early Childhood Centre had made a suggestion to maybe reduce his days whilst he was getting used to the program, and the hours were reduced down to 3 hours a day in the middle of that time frame, that 5-hour time frame. So mum, obviously, as I said, the key worker was coming fortnightly to meet, and mum had shared this new change to what had happened for Omar and his schedule. They also, of course, talked about things that were going well, and it was agreed that then another care team meeting with everybody involved would be a really good idea. And at that, they really did get to focus in on what was working well and why, to be able to think about that and harness that and do more of that. And then also, what were the challenges? And in a nutshell, it came down to things like transitions, group or mat time or a story time could be challenging. He wasn't eating regularly at kinder, and drop off and pick up could be challenging as well. So through the course of this conversation, there was an agreement that they would look at that the reduced hours perhaps were not an effective way to manage what was happening for him. So we're going to increase the hours again, but we're going to put more structure and supports in place for him. And one of the key things around that was actually looking at what were the expectations. So within the room, there was already a visual schedule, but for Omar, having every little part of the day seen that or there and referred to was too much, and it was overwhelming. So an agreement to step back those expectations and introduce a simpler version of it. So as you can see up there, I put a first then. So really trying to think about what are our expectations for right now, and what could be changed, and really wanting to take the pressure off him as well. In terms of what food at the kinder program, there was an agreement that mum would really do her best in order to give him a really big, wholesome brekkie before he came, and then perhaps a light dinner or an early dinner at the other end of the day, so that he was getting really good nutritional input. But they would, whilst he was there in the program, perhaps take some pressure off eating and not have an expectation that he does need to be eating regularly throughout the day or at the scheduled times. So mum, of course, was still packing all the foods that he likes in there, but just changing that expectation and taking some of the pressure off was agreed upon. In terms of, and I'm going back to what was working well, they really focused in on what were the preferred activities that he was doing lots of, and let's work out how to increase those, and where can we put them in multiple different places. Can we have the same things inside, outside, in all the different spaces, so that he has access to preferred activities. And there was a really good conversation about looking at, and I've put it in inverted commas there, developmentally easy toys. What I mean by that is looking at things that he can really be successful, and toys and games he can be really successful at, that will make him happy, but also perhaps take off some cognitive load. Really wanting to recognise that this is a new environment for him. He's navigating being separated from family. He's in a new space, different people, lots of other children around him. There's a lot to cope with. So what can we do in order to reduce that cognitive load and help him be successful? There were agreements around mat time, and there was some conversations with the whole group, recognising that whilst Omar might not be joining group time or mat time or a story time physically, sitting down all the time, that's okay. So they're recognising that there needs to be work done for everyone in that space, and they'd increase the hours and check in another couple of weeks. So that was kind of what was agreed for the centre. But then, of course, there needs to be work at home. This cannot happen without the partnership. And I can't remember who it was, but someone talked, Michelle, I think, talked about partnership at the very beginning and the importance of it. So the care worker accessed some more support from the OT at home, really honed in on his sensory needs, and was there. The OT was then able to provide more input and ideas for the kinder. The key worker was actually added to Story Park. Now, I know that's not a straightforward thing, but it did mean there was an immediate communication tool, so that then if the kinder teacher had a really quick question, she could pop it in Story Park and either mum or the key worker could actually provide a quick response. And they looked at techniques like ABC charts and behaviour escalation charts, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. So what happened? Things started to improve for Omar, I'm really pleased to say, and he was calmer at drop-off, transitions were going more smoothly. The early childhood team noticed that whilst he wasn't participating in group time, he was watching and he was starting to take things in, which is great. The sensory program from the OT was really beneficial and had some really good pointers on what to look for in his body. Before you might get to that dysregulated behaviour. They added some more sensory equipment into the room. He was responding well to first and then. There was still some challenges. The end of the day was still really tricky. He did like to spend most of his day outside. Can be challenging, of course, in the middle of winter in the horrible rainy weather. And the ECEC team did a really great job of sitting down and thinking about what are the other supports that the Department of Education offers in order to be able to put some comprehensive supports around him. I guess the benefit for mum was he was very tired at the end of kinder day, so an early dinner and into bed early was beneficial for them too, because then he was eating well, sleeping well, and he was tired. That maybe gave mum a little bit more time in the evenings. And one of the key things then was the recognition that we need to meet regularly. So we need to have a planned series of meetings in place, and obviously they can be modified if things happen. But that was really key. Oh, and I think I'll stop there. Oh, can I just go back one slide, Michelle? Sorry. I just wanted to talk about I put a picture of a lemon tree on there, and I really wanted to comment on that today. There was a fabulous OT that I worked with at one point who talked around the concept of resilience. And the analogy that she used was, if I have a lemon tree and my lemon tree is not doing particularly well, I will look at all the different things in that environment in order to support my lemon tree to grow better. So I will look at, has it got enough sunlight? Does it have enough water? Do I need compost? Do I need different fertilizer? What's the pH of the soil? I could go into lots of scientific detail. But I look at all of those different things around that lemon tree before I start to think the lemon tree needs to work harder actually here and produce more lemons for me. And I think that really resonated for me in terms of when we're working with, as adults working with children, we need to look at all the different bits around the child and what we have in the structures and environment, expectations that we have before we start thinking, okay, a child needs to change and adapt. All those other things have to be in place as well if we're going to look at that concept of resilience. So that was my case study on Omar. I hope all of that made sense. I'll stop sharing now.
Excellent, thank you, Sally. I'm wondering if any of our panellists wanted to comment on Omar's situation, or maybe how your service might have intervened in that situation.
Michelle, I think it's lovely that we've got Lee talking about us having to be detectives and Sally talking about us having to be gardeners as well. I think it makes a lot of sense. And for Jackie and I think that it's really important when we look at the programs that Department of Education can support for the inclusion. Now, there's not just access, there's participation, and we would really, we know that it's best for children to get as many hours of quality early childhood education as they possibly can. So we want to retain them as much as possible at the full hours of kindergarten. So we feel like we're a little bit the pH of the soil in the lemon tree example, because we do have some programs that aren't really well known. So some of them are quite well known. Everyone, I think, understands the school readiness funding. And Lee, it's lovely touching base with you in the sense that Alannah and Madeline Foundation do a lot of work in that space for our school readiness funding. And for anyone online today that is unaware of what school readiness funding is, it's a little bit like, it's not the same, but it's a little bit like equity funding that the schools get. So it's to support the inclusion and participation of all children, and to identify what what additional supports are in place there. So it's a great program, and it's great funding for our kindergarten programs across the state. Sorry, I'm jumping in here, Michelle. I'm not sure if you want to ask me a question or if I can keep going.
Keep going, it's fine.
And I'm also conscious that Sally and Lee, you might not have finished there. So, do you want me to? I don't want to. If you've got more to add there.
I think the other thing I would probably add in summary is this particular case study. I have brought one today that was a little person that I worked with a little while ago, and this was a really positive outcome. It really did require a whole lot of collaboration and a commitment of time from every single adult working with Omar. So it is possible out there, and I think if I think about other children that I've worked with, it's really about being flexible and creative, and sometimes it's about giving yourself the time to stop and step back and think about, be that person up on the balcony looking down on the dance floor to see what actually is really going on. Really hard, I know, when you're in the busyness of the day in working in early childhood, but that pause actually gives you sometimes the headspace to think about, have I got all the bits around my lemon tree that I really need to have in place before I start putting more expectations or different expectations on a child?
Great. Michelle, I suppose just on that, following on from Sally, just a reminder everyone, Jackie and I from the Early Childhood Improvement Branch for the Department of Education. So we're overseeing things like the school readiness funding and the other programs. So we do actually specifically want to talk about something called flexible support packages that we've been utilising in our Barwon area for the retention of children for their kindergarten hours when there's been complex cases come upon services. So I will have a little bit of a talk around that. But you are right when you talk about the dance floor. So it's about leadership as well. So how is the leadership of services actually enabling and supporting? And one of the things we really want to promote is the fact that there is these other opportunities, and they are the utilisation of their school readiness funding. There's allied health that goes alongside the school readiness funding. There is supporting our services, our educators, on how they do fill out kindergarten inclusion support forms and that whole process. And there is something that we call the flexible support packages. So Jackie's going to give us a good example of that. Jackie and I and a couple of our team members in the Barwon region have been working closely with the Lookout team to ensure that when there is the need for a flexible support package to be put in place, we come together to actually really have some wraparound support from that service. So we don't go in and do the therapy or the direct contact in the service to directly support the kindergarten teacher. We work with the provider, so that's often might be an area manager or a centre director, and it might be the kindergarten teacher as well, and they're certainly involved in having the conversation around what are the challenges for the child to continue to participate. So the flexible, I'll just quickly tell you what the flexible support package program is. It is a short-term package that is made available to eligible children. Now, those eligible children really are children who come with complex trauma generally, but we also want to make sure that if anyone has some concerns that the child they're talking about is or is not eligible, that they make sure they contact the Early Childhood Improvement Branch. And our details for the various regions are available on Department of Education's website. But that means we can talk you through that process, whether you think that the current situation that you've got, you might be eligible. It's a short-term package. It goes for around about 10 weeks. And the intent really is to support the continued participation of that child who comes with a background of complex trauma. It is also about building the staff capability, and that's a really important point for us. So we know that the packages, we've seen some outcomes already, that some of these packages have actually meant that these particular services haven't come back to apply for another package because they've built the staff capability, which is a really important thing. And it is also, it gives that service, that 10 weeks gives that service some time to work for some long-term inclusion planning for that child. So it's about getting the key workers together, having that time to be able to think about how they might change their school readiness funding, having time to apply for different packages like KISS and things like that. It is short term, but 10 weeks, so that they have got that time. And it's really important that you bring the right people together as well. So that's, I suppose that there's probably more questions about that, and we're happy to go to that in a minute, but we might give you an example of that. In the meantime, Jackie and I have been working closely with someone more recently, haven't we, Jackie, that's had some great outcomes.
I was going to say, before we do that, what I think Nicole's really identified is that the Early Childhood Improvement Branch is a support for services. It's not the regulatory body, sorry, my tongue tied. So we're not quiet. So our service support is around building quality and supporting services to remove barriers for the program, for children's participation, etc. So for the example that Sally provided, where a child was reduced right down in terms of hours, it would be a great opportunity for that service to reach out to the Early Childhood Improvement Branch, because there potentially is supports that we can provide in navigating what that looks like, in community help, exploring other programs such as the flexible support program if it was a relevant thing, and just helping, you know, the long-term inclusion plan for that child as well. So I think that was just a really important point to come back to, was that we are here as a support. We're not here as the punitive, we're coming in to tell you compliance kind of thing. This is a different part of the department, and it's a resource, and we will take calls and emails from stakeholders as well. So it's not just about services. So for example, Sally might have been in a position where she felt, you know, that it would be good to bring the department in to help facilitate with those conversations or explore other options. And she would be quite welcome to reach out to us to have those conversations, just to, you know, keep everybody on the same path, which the ultimate path is that this child attends their 15 hours of kinder each week. Does that all make sense to everybody?
Jackie, I was just going to add in there, thank you for clarifying that. And before you jump into our example, I think it's really good just to clear up for everyone what a flexible support package can be. So basically it's that funding, that short-term funding for 10 weeks where you can employ an additional educator to support. That's mainly what it's used for, not all the time. Sometimes it's utilised to have some trauma-informed practice training for the staff team, or sometimes it's both. And occasionally it's there to have some direct support from, you know, an allied health worker as well. So especially if it's a service that doesn't have very much allied health sessions under their school readiness funding. So yeah, I just thought I'll throw that bit in. But Jackie, I'll let you go to, have we got time now, Michelle, to just to give us a little example?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you.
All right, so as Nicole said, it's a short-term intervention. So generally what happens is either a service will reach out to us or a stakeholder. So sometimes a preschool field officer, sometimes a early childhood learning advisor from Lookout will reach out and say, we've got this child with challenges, behaviours that challenge. We feel like we need more support. So the first step for us as a Barwon team is we kind of look at everything holistically. So we go, okay, so what's going on with the school readiness funding? Is there any flexibility? Can we, you know, change up some of the menu items to put something else in that's going to provide the support we need? Taking into consideration that some of the school readiness menu items, especially Alannah and Madeline Foundation, can be quite difficult to get into quickly. So that's one of the things that we often take into account. And one thing Nicole didn't explain was that school readiness funding, not everyone has the same amount. So it's based on your on data of the location of the service, the education and family backgrounds of the parents, and they get a calculated amount. So some might have $5,000 for a year and some might have $50,000 for a year, depending on what their demographic is. So if I use the example that I was going to talk about, you know, this is a service that's in a fairly it's not in a lower class, like a lower socioeconomic area. It's quite affluent with lots of, you know, working families. So their school readiness funding is not particularly high, which means that they don't have a lot of flexibility to add anything else into that plan. So that's a tick for us, right? Okay, so we can't do anything with the school readiness funding. They have a next thing would be what other supports are available. So preschool field officer would be our next step. They have a referral pending, but it's still pending because obviously preschool field officers are very, very busy. So it could be several weeks before they are able to make contact with the service. So we go tick, right, that's not available for us either. And so then we talk about provider support. So sometimes, depending on the service, they might have access to inclusion coaches or pedagogical coaches or things like that within their service, within their provider, so within their bigger, wider organisation. And in this case, that wasn't the case. So that's where we all agreed that we would go ahead with a screening tool. So that's the first part of the flexible support package. It's a de-identified screening tool, and all that does is identify eligibility. So it says, yes, you can go ahead and submit an application or not. So once that's complete, and that's led by the Early Childhood Improvement Branch, that's really important to know. So all the documents are available on the DE website, but it is an ESIB-led approach. So someone from an ESIB team, your local ESIB team, would lead that approach. So once we get, so in this case, we were given provisional eligibility. So then it was thinking about what this service needed to be able to, one, maintain and stabilise enrolment so that child could access 15 hours, and then two, what is it that would provide the most support to allow for not just that child's long-term inclusion, but supporting them to be able to meet the needs more effectively of any child who had behaviours that challenged that came through that door. And just, I did forget to mention that the other thing that we would look at is whether they had a diagnosis or an NDIS plan, or whether they were eligible for KISS or inclusion support funding, excuse me, because if they were eligible for those things, we would explore those first before going to a flexible support package. So the flexible support package is really if there's nothing else that we could possibly access to support this child, that's when we would explore this program. So in the case of this service, we sat down and had a conversation with the area manager and with the teacher, and we established that the teacher was very trauma informed and very capable, but the rest of her team didn't have the same level of skills. And so therefore, not only was the teacher trying to support the inclusion of the child, she was also trying to upskill and educate the rest of her team, as well as attend care team meetings and, you know, all of these different things that were going on. And she was exhausted and she was burnt out, and she was finding that the other educators in the room were avoiding the child and leaving it for her to do. And we really identified that it was the other staff that were lacking in understanding and confidence and expertise in managing a child with, well, not managing, that's not the right word, supporting a child with complex trauma. So we identified that an additional educator would be really relevant to have in the room to support just the general day-to-day functioning of the group, but that wasn't going to be enough to stabilise that enrolment ongoing. That was only going to be enough for right this second to increase supervision. And so we talked about what would be best suited for that particular group of educators. And it was identified that if we had someone come in and provide in situ coaching, that they would probably be quite confronted by that, and that wouldn't suit them well. And so instead we explored some face-to-face professional learning and then some team mentoring. So that's kind of an opportunity to come together outside of the kinder room and talk about what's been going on and, you know, what's going well, what's not going well, and reflecting and changing practice. And so just so it's clear, unlike other programs that we DE fund, services actually fill the positions for the additional educator themselves. It's not a supplied position like it is with kindergarten inclusion support. And the services need to find trauma-informed professional learning and trauma-informed practitioners themselves, but we encourage them to do it, to look at the SRF menu and reach out to like Alannah and Madeline first before exploring other options. So the outcomes essentially were that we started to see a shift in the mindset of the educators who started to have their knowledge built around why, as Sally said, the function of the behaviours, that it was a tool of communication, starting to understand why those behaviours were happening and starting to reflect on their role within the room, and then starting to see the more of those educators being open more often to engaging with that child throughout all aspects of the program, rather than just, you know, jumping in when things are getting tough or whatever, but spending time with him and learning about what he enjoys and what he loves, and really building some positive relationships, which is the key to trauma-informed practice. And I guess talking about flexible support packages in general, what we've noted is that having that focus on capability building, we are seeing services, much fewer services requiring that kind of support again. So, you know, the number of services that require an additional flexible support package, whether it's for that child or another child, has dropped quite a lot. And so we're quietly confident that the work that we've been doing in building capability has actually had a pretty good impact on services' ability to include children over the longer term. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jackie. Christie, did you want to add anything about while we're talking about flexible support packages, or Daniel?
Nothing, no, not much more detail on that. So, but yeah, I just wanted to thank Barwon colleagues, because the work they've been doing in terms of really focusing on the capability building is really amazing. And so really, really impressed by their work and the work of the services in that region. The only thing I would add is that the flexible support program has a set of practice principles, which I won't go through, but they're in the publicly available guidelines, and we can send them around in some information after the session. But I think it's really I'd encourage people to think about those principles in line with their kind of own centre philosophies and kind of knowledge, particularly if we're thinking about children with backgrounds of complex trauma, to really make sure that what they're proposing and planning is coherent and consistent and really kind of scaffolds, because to both simplify the pathway and the process and who's involved for the child, but also also for the further service, so we can see the service can kind of experience that building of capability and relationships. But I'll pause there, because I'm just really keen to as well hear from Lee, who is very much the expert in the space. So,
yeah, thank you for that. And look, can I just say, I really want to commend the department for all of these initiatives that we see as wonderful opportunities to address early vulnerability and disadvantage. And we see education as the real key there. And this is eyes early on children who, in other parts of my career, I've worked with very complex adolescents with very high needs, the sort that you're hearing about a lot in the media lately. And, the number of times where we've wondered, what would have been different had we had educators early on being supported to actually work with and make sense of what it is that we're seeing. There is so much to say in response to what I've heard so far, and all really powerful. So thank you to my panel colleagues. But just a couple of things first. And I know I got an introduction from Michelle earlier. I just do want to acknowledge that I'm not an educator. My background is not in education. My team bring a very niche skill set based on decades, in many instances, of practice in working with children and families with significant vulnerability. And so we work in a way that partners very much with the relationship holders, the educators in this instance, to work with the children and families. We don't come in as experts in education, and we are not the relationship holders. So our role is very much, I think, as Nicole said earlier, about being detectives and shifting the narrative from trying to fix children to trying to understand them. And indeed, many of you would have heard this term before. I certainly haven't coined it, but moving from what is wrong with this child to what has happened to them, what have their experiences been. And each of us hold a piece of the jigsaw, right? So, and for me, this speaks to the immense importance of care teams. And if we think of it like a jigsaw puzzle, and each person in the story of that child's life will hold a piece of that jigsaw, and we really get a full picture and a full understanding and see the real beauty of that child, then we can share the pieces of the jigsaw that we each hold. So for those members of the audience who are in roles where they're not in education either, and perhaps they're working in other services, just the incredible importance of partnering with education, with early education, with educators and learning spaces to really work alongside them for the benefit of the children and the families that you're working with. The role of flexible support packages we've seen produce some real magic, and I think echoing some of the sentiment that's already been shared, you work with one, you build the capability and the understanding of one educator about one child, you build her understanding, his understanding of many children. And really what we're wanting to do is extrapolate out that child's individual circumstances and really sit with educators to understand what it is that they're bringing in. Work's incredibly tough, hats off. I actually started when I first left high school studying a diploma in early childhood education, and decided it was a pretty tough gig, and I was far too nosy anyway. I really needed to be a social worker and find out more about what's going on over here in that part of that child's life, so off I trotted. I have a real big passion and commitment to this space, but I recognise it's really hard work. And so when we have those educators calling us, those teachers calling us frequently in tears about some of the really complex challenges that they're managing every single day, they continue to turn up and step into relationships with children who are presenting really, really challenging behaviours. Our model very much speaks to, well, let's start with you. So let's start with the adults in the space. If we want well-regulated, well-engaged children, we have to have well-regulated, well-engaged adults, right? Like, we have to actually start with the adults. Children can't feel safe, they can't feel supported and engaged in early learning if the adults around them are in fight, if they're in a sense of panic, if they're feeling overwhelmed and, you know, as Jackie spoke earlier, completely exhausted by behaviour. And we see often that it's one educator, one teacher in a room who's holding the kind of lion's share because everyone else is kind of just can't do it anymore. It's really, really hard work. Our particular model of support, and particularly with regards to our trauma consultancy service, or TRACS, that's on the SRF menu, and again I'll share some information about this in a moment, really about it's not just a training model. Yes, training is really important. I don't know how many other people have done Excel like I have multiple times, but do not ask me to put a spreadsheet together, because it's what we do in the day-to-day, in our lives and in our work. It's the practice of having someone to go to and ask that question to reinforce an action that we might take. So yes, part of what we do offer is training, so we have a common and a shared language, but it's also about how do we then, in the moment, in session, be able to step in and observe and notice what's happening. And then, as Jackie spoke about earlier, also being able to come outside of that space, because where real change happens is in the reflection. It's in that moment of saying, hey, I noticed this, or I felt this happening for me, or I really experienced this situation in this way, or I'm really wondering, or I'm curious about. That's where the magic happens. And being able to stay in that curious space can't happen all the time in the room with the children present, you know, and they're not there on their own, it's worth noting. There's sometimes 29 other children in the same space. So being able to hold a range of spaces and a different ways to work with educators and with care teams is really, really important. I also just want to say lastly, I do apologise that people are waiting, and we recognise that we are quite overwhelmed at the moment in terms of the request for work. Always open to other ways we could think about it and how we could fund it so that we have resources available. And we've made that offer before to the department. So if there is an appetite to do that, we would absolutely be interested in the conversation. But, you know, the need is really great, and getting that early intervention done early and building capability and building resilience early is, you know, is our view of the way forward. So, yeah, I'll hand the talking stick back to someone else now, maybe to Michelle.
Lee, just on that, sorry, Michelle, be 1 second. Just on that, I really think you've when you talk about the teachers and there's a lot of the you know, dysregulation and things going on. I think what we have to remember is we've got this awesome reform happening, which is great. We're getting more and more children into funded kindergarten, and with that, we're growing the workforce so quickly that we've got to consider the fact that I think our educators need more support because a lot of them are new.
Yeah, that's right. And how many of them have done pre-service training about how trauma shows up? How many of them come in, as many of the, and, you know, in some instances, the teachers are in fairly senior roles fairly quickly, managing teams, and they're 23 or 24. So, you know, where is the kind of support and scaffolding around that to kind of hold that and build that level of confidence and confidence. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And Lee, I think we've got many programs there that maybe we need to just start to pull them all in and join the dots a little bit more. So we've got lots there, but I think it's like how we're accessing it might be one of the challenges. So, that's where all these, as I don't know whether it was Sally or you, Lee, said about the ecosystem. That's what we need to get right and pull it all in together. And I think talking like this now is just fantastic. So, and I like to think that the Early Childhood Improvement Branch is the door for everyone. Just come and ask us. It might not be us, but we'll direct you where you need to go, type of thing. So please hold our number. I think Joe or someone stuck the web page in the link there. Please grab that. So yes, sorry, Michelle, I'll stop talking. I'll handball back to you.
No, that's good. And, I think picking up on what you said, Lee, like, in terms of the importance of care teams, they are incredibly important for children, particularly where there are quite complex needs. And often that child is just one piece of that family as well that might all have individual complex needs. And I know we kind of plan to pose a question to you about helping support educators, but I think it's bigger than educators. It's the whole care team in being able to, foster and champion that inclusive practice. And as you said, it's everybody bringing their piece of the puzzle and actually moving on from talking about what the problems are, being able to step back, I guess, from maybe its behaviour or something like that, and reflecting about how we respond to that, but also how our particular services can help support that situation in terms of making a plan moving forward, because sometimes care teams, and I've certainly been a part of them as well in my 20 years of practice, get really stuck in the burden of the problems, and we get stuck, all of us as professionals get stuck sometimes in knowing what to do next, feeling like we've tried everything. So sometimes taking that step back and kind of reflecting as a group as well is a really important step in terms of being able to then make a plan forward. I know Joe's popped in the chat as well some resources we developed last year about looking at positive behaviour guidance, but also just reflective practice for care teams. When you show up to those meetings and you think, oh, we keep talking about the problems and we're not making any progress, sometimes it's good to have a tool that you can pick up and take to kind of maybe reframe that conversation into, again, a more positive, more solution focused conversation rather than being bogged down in the program. But I'm sure you've all probably experienced that too.
I think also, I was just going to say, I think it's really important too, just talking about that in terms of thinking about the positives and not always focusing on the problems, is that for children who've experienced trauma in particular, education is a protective factor. And so for some children, it might be the only consistent thing that they have access to. So it's really important to support services to understand the role that they play in a child's life in that respect, and, supporting a mind shift away from the child is the problem, and that we are the support for that child, and what can we do to help that child to feel safe.
I think in the context of services, and I'm going to use an example here from long day care actually. So we're working in a 3 and a 4-year-old room, but there was a long day care service where there was complex need across the whole service, working in a community characterised by fairly high rates of disadvantage, lots of families known to child protection, and we're asked to consult about a 2-year-old room. And no one wanted to work in the 2-year-old room, which seems extraordinary because I think it's exceptionally cute when they're that age. They're starting to really use language and communicate really, really fabulously well. But what we looked at was that we had extremely distressed children who cried continuously throughout the day, who wouldn't settle down for rest times, and we had an exhausted set of educators that were in that space really struggling. No one wanted to work there. When we actually had a look at what was actually going on, there were several things. Of the 10 children that were in that room, 7 of them were in out-of-home care. had experienced enormous amounts of change. And due to a whole range of factors that had to do with the organisation and the kind of structuring of rosters and so forth, there were 8 educators working in that room in a single day. Now, I don't think I have to explain to too many people why having 8 different adults care for a 2-year-old who's experienced multiple placement changes might be problematic. And it was certainly no mystery to us that it's hardly surprising that they weren't settling to sleep, because who's going to be picking them up when they wake up at the other end? It was really a lack of safety in that space. So it's not just the responsibility, I think, also of the the educators are in that space either. Part of the work that we've been doing, which again, I'm happy to share this, and it is available free of charge, so share it far and wide. We did a big piece of work with the sector a couple of years ago that was funded by philanthropy, to look at how organisations, so how leadership in organisations, those EYMs, those those large services in particular, how the role they play to really work alongside their educators and work as a team too. So there's the care team that can child protection, out of home care, family violence, disability, some of those other players. There's the internal care team element as well that's needed to replicate, I guess, that same thing, and use curiosity to understand what's showing up in the adults. We know through the Australian Child Maltreatment study that was done here a couple of years ago that 62% of adults in this country have experienced at least one form of maltreatment. And in fact, it was actually more common for those adults who have experienced 2 or more types of maltreatment than none at all. Those adults are our workforce. Though that 62% is representative, so there was an 8,500 sample across this country, there are educators that are sitting in that. So if you have an educator who themselves has experienced child maltreatment, who is experiencing family violence as an adult, and they have those children and families come to their service, we have to be in a place where we can recognise what all those parts of the puzzle are. And so what we're seeing in the adults in terms of their dysregulation or taking lots of sick days or their stress levels, it's all part of that jigsaw puzzle that we need to put together.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lee. I might pose a different question to you all. Feel free to jump in. But how can caseworkers or educators or whoever it might be working with a family and involve their parents and caregivers, I guess, in this process in terms of how to best support the child, especially maybe when trust has been broken or compromised by past experiences, whether that might be child protection reports or previous experiences with services that may have not been particularly positive. I wonder if anyone wanted to comment.
Sure, I'll jump in. Happy to comment on that. I would say go slow. You really need to go slow, build those relationships, build those rapport, and if there have been backgrounds where trust may have been broken, you may have to go even slower. And I think within that, it's really important to be focusing on as many positive things as possible. What was positive that the child did that day, even if it was a tiny, tiny little thing, anything at all to try and make that parent feel like everything is going to be okay and that we are seeing success with the child in this environment, to hopefully give them confidence in the team and what the team are actually trying to do. I think it is also really about giving a parent an opportunity when they need it in order to have conversations. Sometimes it may feel like it's the worst possible time. It may be when you're trying to say goodbye to a whole bunch of other families and they really want to talk to you, trying to be flexible around how you approach that, because if they've had the courage to come and have a conversation with you or want to talk to you about something, if you can jump on that as quickly as possible, then hopefully that will build some more trust and improve that and create that relationship, good, really positive working relationship that you're aiming to put together. Maybe I'll let someone else jump in now.
Michelle, I think, oh, sorry, were you about to hop in then, Lee?
Yeah, but I could talk about that all day and half the evening too. So please go ahead.
I'll be really
jump in.
quick and handball back to
No,
you.
that's fine.
So Jackie and I and the ESIB team, when we are working on, especially if we're working on any support packages and talking with the service, we are really conscious that is there a cultural need to have a Koori education support officer that is also supporting, or any other cultural aspects if it's a refugee and asylum seeker family? Is there anything, what are the needs of that family before we get into this position? With flexible support packages, our initial, as Jackie said, contact is de-identified, so we don't know who the child is, and we're working with the provider itself. But there is a process where that family must then agree to the proposal of a package. So, but at that stage, we want to be really careful around the discussion we're having with them. Sally, I agree with you. It's time is really important. Doing that in an appropriate time, giving the time, also ensuring you're remaining confidential and offering that family that privacy is required. And also for the staff need to feel confident and have that privacy and confidentiality as well. But I just wanted to throw in there that we do have Koori engagement support officers in any of our, supports with services. So that's an important one to remember for anyone who's working outside of the department or child protection who might be here today, or other family services, that we do have access to them too, and that's a really important part of our process. And if it is a child who is in out-of-home care, usually we have the lookout team that is available too to support that. Over to you, Lee.
Yeah, so I've lost the thread a little bit of what I was going to say, but I think it was bouncing off what Sally was saying before, which is the go-slow piece. And build on that would be connection first. Connection first. So you can't, connection before correction. So, get to know your children and and the adults that are in their orbit. Connection first. We often get asked, just tell us what to do. Give us the tools. What's in the toolkit? And sure, I mean, that's true. There are things that you can do, that you can use, but it's pointless if there's no connection first. So start with connection, I guess, would be the big thing that I would start with, and probably end with too.
I think
Absolutely.
also
and I think being
too,
clear about your boundaries and expectations, sorry, Jackie, is important too. Like, there are absolutely times, as most of the people in this room are probably mandatory reporters under the current legislation, where we actually do have to, we have to report concerns, but I guess being upfront about that at the outset, not, about the types of situation that may require you to take further action, can sometimes help families to understand, if those things happen, a report gets made to child protection and a family is contacted, that, that they do understand that is part of the role as an educator or a social worker, being a mandatory reporter. There are times when you are required by legislation to report those things. And I'm not just necessarily talking about individual families here. I'm talking about, as a whole service system, that we're upfront, that there are times when those things do have to happen, and that is part of your role, whether that's in education, in social work, in a medical profession, for example, that's part of the requirement. And this service system is here, I guess, to work with the family and to support them to try and reduce, if we're talking about risk, like reduce that level of risk or increase that child's, capacity of being included in education. That's what when we're talking about care teams, that's the goal of the care team, really, is to make sure that that child and that family has the support that they need to be able to function, safely in whatever environment it is that we might be talking about. So I think sometimes that helps too. Sorry, Jackie, off you go.
No, that's okay. I just also, I guess I wanted to bring, and thank you to Christine for putting it in the chat, that in early childhood, especially for children who have a KISS package, is that there is a requirement for a KISS package, but they're a really good best practice approach anyway, is to have something called a program support group meeting, which is where everyone comes to the table. So it isn't called a care meeting or a care team meeting because that has lots of different meanings from different I guess
sectors,
stakeholders and providers and things like that. So in child protection, a care team meeting is about talking about working through the looking after children framework, so all their health needs and family needs and court and all of those sorts of things. And education is a tiny little aspect of it, whereas a program support group meeting is a time to come together for families to share their thoughts and ideas around the goals for their child in education, and for really strong collaboration with the parents, the teacher, potentially a key worker, could be child protection, to actually work on some goals for that child, strategies for that child, and potential outcomes that might have happened from the work, the hard work that they've done. So they're really important. If a child is out of home care, look out, have a bit of a guidance around running a program support group meeting. But if there's any questions about it, please feel free to reach out to Early Childhood Improvement Branch, and we can do our best to guide you around that sort of stuff.
We're just here to plug ourselves, really, Michelle.
No, we plug you too, Nicole. Anyone who's been to any of our training or webinars before will know we talk a lot about reaching out, to the Early Childhood Improvement Branch where there are barriers, because we know that, the teams across the state are doing fantastic work in trying to support that access and participation for young children. Because we're getting close to the end of our webinar today, I'm wondering if each of you would like to give some advice to a new caseworker or educator who might be just starting out in their career, like we've talked about already, that wants to create a truly inclusive and trauma-informed learning journey for the children that they might be involved in, whether that's in an education space or from a child and family services kind of support role. From all your years of collective wisdom, what would your messages be for that new educator or new caseworker?
I think I'd be saying, who's on my team? There shouldn't be an expectation that this is work that I have to do in isolation myself. I need to think about, and I think Lee talked about it when she talks about her program, is they start with the adults there. So as that adult in the space, I need to be thinking about who is on my team, who is supporting me, who is actually providing me with time to reflect and having professional reflective conversations with me. If there isn't a team, how do I get that team? And who could be on my team in order to support me? I really take your point, Michelle. You talked a little bit about boundaries. They're really important, and staying in your lane and knowing what is my responsibility and what is not, I think, is equally important. And in that context of a care team or a program support team, having really clear communication around who's doing what and who is responsible for what and by when is pretty critical, rather than, I don't know, a bit of a free-form team that is just meandering along. The success of the team depends on that organisation and structure and commitment from each person. And it's okay to say, actually, I don't think that's really for me to do. I think somebody else in the team might be better actually doing that. So got to look after yourself along the way as well, because we want people to be working with children and staying in our sector for a long period of time. And we're playing a long game here. You can't fix everything straight away. So be kind to yourself as well.
I love that. I think I'll just add on to that a little bit further, Sally, just that notion of being kind to yourself. And I spoke to the notion before of being well regulated and yourself, and the importance of self-regulation as a precondition to being able to regulate with children. So focusing on the relationship building and connection rather than any particular intervention, because if there's not a relationship as a basis, the intervention isn't going to have very little long-term impact. The other thing that I would say is be curious. Be curious. We get a lot of calls and inquiries, often because there's that child with a big prickly behaviour. You know, that child that's swearing and biting and hitting and is exhausting the adults. But sometimes we go into services and we're really more worried about that child that's sat at that pasting and cutting table for the last hour and a half and hasn't spoken to anyone and hasn't moved. Or the child who's sitting under the table or in a beanbag, not interacting with anyone, but actually not really causing anyone any trouble, not really necessarily causing them much of a headache, but whose story is really untold and unknown. So be curious about all the children that are in your room, because they will all find different ways to communicate what's happening for them. All our behaviour is a form of communication. The big behaviour is easy to spot. The small behaviours are a little bit harder. But there will be a story there too. So, you know, there's a model that we use, which is the PACE model. I'm not sure if people on the screen are familiar, but it's playful, accepting, curious, and empathic. And they're kind of the big tools in your toolkit as an educator: playful, accepting, curious, empathic. So that would be my advice, along with the self-care and the kindness message that Sally spoke to.
Thanks, Lee. Nicole or Jackie, do you have any advice for a new person starting out?
I'll jump in and let Jackie do the last one. Oh, we had Sally yet? No, not yet. We have. Very good. Good. I'm saying all of the above, but I suppose I can go the practical sense here, Michelle, and say utilise your Alannah and Madeline when they come up. Save up all your questions. Ask them. Say this is a challenge. You know, really lay it on them. That's what they're there for. Along with your allied health from SRF, utilise that when you've got those challenges about particular children. But the key big thing I want everyone to keep in mind, because it's a really hard gig. It's such, when you have children that are coming into your service that are dysregulated and they're going through that process, they're okay for the first week, then they're all like Omar, and then they're, you know, it's a really hard ride. And so I think that, you know, reach out to your leaders to say it is, I need a bit of a break too, or I need some support here. That's what they're there for. But the one thing, it seems like a motherhood statement here, but don't underestimate the amazingly significantly positive difference you can make in a child's life. So that foundational early childhood education and the people who are delivering that to children can make quite a significant difference in a child's life. So keep that front in mind, that there's lots of you out there that are amazing.
I don't really know how to follow all of that. That's I mean, practically as well, reach out to your known resources. So as an educator, reach out to your preschool field officer, reach out to your ESIB team, you know, reach out to your CESOs. Use the resources that you know who can help guide you to start that journey. And it's also about education and having that open mindset. So if you really want to be inclusive and you want to support children, it really is about being open that there are lots of different other ways of being and doing, and that the more flexible you are and the more open you are to creative ideas and creative thinking, the more open your journey will be to positive outcomes. So it's really about thinking there's not just a one way of doing things that's going to work for everybody or for you.
Thanks, Jackie. Christie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Anything, no wisdom on that. I just want to I would just say thank you. I know that sounds really glib, but if that's all I could really say, I think, to our young educators. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. In terms of time, I'm just going to bring up the slides again, but I did want to say thank you to all of you for sharing your expertise and perspectives with us today. It's great to be able to have conversations like these and look at some of the things, and this is just on the slides, a bit of a quick visual reminder of some of the things that we have covered today, and not all of them. We will, as always, send out a bit of a summary of the session as well. But looking at, obviously trauma-informed practice, open and honest communication, how we involve parents and caregivers and what that might look like, planning, accessing and utilising the support systems that are available. And I think, as you've all said in your messages for new workers, knowing who your phone a friend is on a particular issue, so whether that's the early childhood improvement branch or specialist services like Sally's and Lee's, that you could reach out to for secondary consultation or a bit of a guidance as to what the next steps might be, or what particular SRF model you might be best suited to the needs of your staffing group if you're in a kindergarten setting and the children that you support. All really important things to develop and to keep building those relationships through practice, I think is really important. So that would be my message. And I guess if you are sitting here, thinking about some of the practice that you've experienced in your organisation or with families that you've been working with, and you've got some really positive examples, what I would like for you to consider doing is the centre broader education team is holding a forum on the 25th of June, which is called Opening Doors, Changing Lives, which is all about celebrating the power of education for children in out-of-home care. And whilst that's going to be a fabulous event, part of that event will be some education awards. And there are categories for educators, so that's educators from early childhood right through the school years and post-secondary education. There's a category for caseworkers, so that could be child and family services, it might be early childhood intervention workers, any kind of support service working with families, with children in out-of-home care. And there's also an award category for young people as well, in terms of supporting them on their education journey, and also a category for child protection practitioners. So if you have, this conversation that we've had today has triggered some reflections from you about some great practice that you've been involved in, we'd be really keen for you to nominate those practitioners, or it might be yourselves, for an award at that event. Joe's popped the link in the chat to the award nomination pack. It's a pretty straightforward and relatively quick process if you are interested, and we'll upload the flyer for the forum in the chat as well if people are interested in attending. We've got some really great speakers lined up for that session. Brooke Blurton, Lem Sisse, Luke Rogers, Kitty Terrell, all from across Australia, but also from the UK, to talk about some of their experiences and how we can work together to, particularly to focus on children in out-of-home care. So we hope you can join us there. Thanks for popping all of that in the chat, Joe. But really that brings us, to the time we had allocated for today's session. So again, I wanted to thank you all for attending, but also thank our panellists for sharing their thoughts and expertise with us. It's been really interesting, and I hope it's been useful for you as well. Please reach out to us if you're stuck or you're not sure where the next step might be or who you should call. Please reach out to us and we will help point you in the right direction as well. There is a link in the chat and also the QR code here on the slide just to a really quick feedback survey. If you've got time to fill that in, we'd really appreciate it. It helps us to shape what these webinars might look like in the future, and who you want to hear from and what you would like to hear about. I also wanted to note that there was a question in the chat about accessing assessments and diagnosis for autism in the chat, which we haven't had time to cover today, but there is on our Early Years Hub website, there is a recording from a webinar we did in February this year on neurodivergence, which really talks about that issue. So if that's an issue that you are struggling with as well, it might be worth jumping on the Early Years Hub resource library and finding that webinar recording so that you can explore that issue further as well. But thank you everyone for joining us.
Oh, yep. Sorry for jumping in, Michelle. I actually just responded to that question in the Q&A.
Excellent.
just really quickly. So there is a really
Perfect.
quick answer in there.
Excellent. Beautiful. Thanks for that, Sally. And
No
thank you
worries.
everyone for joining us. We'll let you go.
Thank you.